Welcome to another session of Radical Grace in the Economy, a podcast based on a workbook by the same name, which is up at radicalgrace.ca. And I'm Gary Russell. I'm the author of the workbook and the initiator of this podcast, but I've invited Jody Knoll to join me as a co-host on it, so we'll play equal roles in this, asking questions together. I'm from Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada, where it's nice and snowy in March. And Jody, you're from Newfoundland, right?
Paradise.
Newfoundland is paradise, or
That's the town I live in.
yeah. And who is our guest, Jody?
Today, Gary, thank you for mentioning that. Once again, it's glad to be here. Gordon Kubanek. Gordon has received and accepted an invitation to join us for a podcast. Gordon is a third order Franciscan who is with us in the American province. And he has been commissioned to facilitate a ministry in the province, JPIC, Justice, Peace, and the Integrity of Creation. So we've invited Gordon into a conversation this afternoon to talk about JPIC in relation to some of the pieces you've published on radical grace and the economy. We're just going to have a kind of a walk through some of these pieces, and I think we're probably going to focus our discussion from, not necessarily towards, but from a foundation in your, this is section chapter 8, denial of Mother Earth, that the economic system we live in denies Mother Earth. And for those who may have access to your workbook at radicalgrace.ca, we're going to have an interesting discussion about this because I'm really looking forward to picking Gordon's mind in responses to some of the statements you've made, Gary. I'm not an economist, but I live in the economy. You keep reminding me. Welcome, Gordon. It's good to have you here.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much for inviting me here. In Ottawa today, it's a beautiful sunny day, getting close to 10 degrees. There's no snow, which is lovely and beautiful, and I'm happy. And yet, when my parents moved here in 1979 to Ottawa from Southern Ontario, a normal March we'd still be pretty much in the middle of winter here. Things have changed. And today, as a sort of a focus on creation, justice, and peace, we'll go through where I see the intersection between what I'm seeing happening around me, and I'm sure you are too, and our Franciscan path, and in particular, how our spirituality can help us have the inner fortitude to be honest with ourselves and our friends and neighbors in a loving way. I want to start off, we mentioned that Gary's book in chapter 8. And so I actually want to start off with just a quote from it. He names chapter 8, Denial of Mother Earth. And since this is a series by Gary, I thought I would quote him and give him some credit for all the hard work he's done. And this is everything I'm going to say is always going to relate back to this in some shape or form. And this is what Gary wrote in his workbook. Conventional economics considers the planet to be no more than a pile of resources waiting to be exploited, as if we stood outside of it. The result is an ongoing degradation of God's garden. An economy of grace recognizes the land is family. We are commissioned by God to care for Mother Earth, to build a relationship that is mutually nurturing, and seek her forgiveness when we ask too much. Where I'm at personally, and why I actually became a Franciscan, was this issue. So I'm going to make it a little bit personal. It turns out it's always personal, actually. I got very sick from a heart virus that was in the environment about 15, maybe almost 20 years ago now. And I was on the table, almost dead, basically, and I had no idea what had happened. It was just a random virus. It took me 2 to 3 years to recover where I could just walk down the driveway. I had a lot of time to think. And in that time, those of you who have experienced the feeling of your own mortality, you try to reinvent yourself and say, what matters? And I said, all I can do now is do something that can help my kids. And I said, what is that? And at that point in time, about 2005, 6, I chose for my personal journey that creation care what became my gig. Because of that choice, I then became a Green Party candidate in Canada through 7 elections. And in the middle of that, I also became a Third Order Franciscan and then a beekeeper. A lot of that journey had to do with facing uncomfortable truths and yet maintaining equanimity and prayerfulness and like still feeling that life was terrific, which turns out to be surprisingly difficult when you go down the rabbit hole of what's happening out there. That's where I'm coming from. Let's open up the floor to Gary or Jody at this point.
I'm figuring Jody and I will alternate asking questions. And I'll start with the first one.
Can I just say,
Okay, go
can I
ahead.
just say, I just want to say thank you to Gordon for mentioning this part of his story, of his life, because a lot of us, a lot of people do have moments of tremendous change, almost conversion of life. So Francis talks about that quite a bit, and we talk about it in the order, in the Franciscan order. And I'm really glad you've shared that, Gordon. I thank you. I really appreciate that.
Yes, thank
So
you. And I appreciate it too because I am one who has had triple bypass heart surgery. And I understand the existential questions that come up at a time like that. Now, on the part that you quoted from sort of the preamble to some of the questions, you mentioned my favorite line that I use very often. I don't think I invented it, but I love it. Is the land is family.
Yeah.
But you're going to encounter a lot of people who are going to say the land is family. What do you mean about that? What do you mean by that? The land is just the earth. What's family about the land? How would you reply to this person?
I would say politely that they would just simply have to notice a bit more things like we eat every day, and the nutritious food we eat comes from the soil. And whatever state the soil is the state of the food, which is the state of your body. So the degrees of separation between the dirt and you are minute. Certainly as a Christian, and I'm presuming that's most of our audience, is that we were formed from dirt and God breathed life into us. That's what we are, not just metaphorically, but literally. I would say that for us in our culture, it's not like an individual thing. Our culture has created this division between the human world and natural world, which is an artificial, basically social construct. And any culture which is indigenous, as in native to the land or connected to the land and trees. I don't just mean North American indigenous, humans everywhere, when they were connected to the land and could see the direct connection and direct result, saw that as an obvious truth. We had simply temporarily had the combined blessing and curse of the Industrial Revolution and technology to separate us and forget about that connection and not notice it. But I would say that's been a temporary amnesia, which I think is ending because of what's happening to the world. So it's we need just to remember that that has been a universal truth until recently. And in my garden, for example, I looked at things like gardeners in terms of, I'm an engineer. And for me, an idea has to work in the real world. And that's partially why was attracted to Franciscan way of thinking, because it's very incarnational and very real and non-abstract. And funny thing, gardeners, it turns out, are much happier than the average person, much healthier than the average person, and they live longer than the average person, because they're doing something real and they've got this connection. And there's anybody who does those kinds of activities are healthier and live longer. And I said, whoa, there's enough evidence for me. And that's would be part of my answer.
I want to throw this one to Jody too, because those children you want to convince are the ones who are listening to the message we hear all the time. We have to save our butts from destruction. And the question arises, is that enough? Is it enough to say we have to save ourselves? Jody.
Yeah. That's not healthy existence. Saving ourselves puts us in a defensive mode, survival mode. That's not the mode I don't think Gordon is talking about. Gordon is talking about a harmony and a weaving together of creation, all of it, like all of it, plant, animal, human, the whole piece. And if we're only contented to say survival mode, that's really not a mode. That's, I think, a defensive piece, which cannot carry us through very far for very long. Gordon, what do you think of that?
I think the thing that popped into my head is a book I read. I read way too many books. I don't know about our audience, but I love it. But one of them was called The Storytelling Animal. And the way it starts off, there's two tribes, and one is extremely practical and defensive and doing the right thing and being logical. And one of them, the other tribe, they mostly sit around the campfires telling stories, myths, legends, adventures, things to inspire and to create dreams from. And the author posits that the first tribe, for a bunch of reasons, basically loses the will to live, that dynamic thing, that spark that says, wow, being alive is amazing. It's terrific. They basically die out. And the quote unquote impractical dreamers, they just are like so passionate. Guess what? They reproduce like mad. And them are us. And we are wired for a story. And we are here as Franciscans really because of a story, and a story that inspires and creates, but is also can become real. We're not talking like fairy tale stories that are like pie in the sky. These are larger than life stories that actually happen, you know, seemingly like impossible, but they happen. And that's what we're after. And that's what Jody's talking about.
Now, that's a tall order. You have everybody believing that we have to have GDP growth. The economy has to flourish. We have to get the minerals out of the land in order to be able to drive our cars. And people are so far away from that.
Yep, yep, absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. I spend a lot of time with environmental people. So I have like a twin life. I have my Franciscan life and I have my environmental hat, which includes the political part of it. Sometimes they align and sometimes they are at odds with each other because we're in the world, right? And that is the current world that we live in. We swim in it every day. We're part of it. We can't not be part of it. So we swim in that reality, but all these things change. I'm a history nut, and every empire ends. And every empire never thought they would end. They all thought they would be forever. The British said the sun will never set on the British Empire. It did. Okay. And this too shall pass. And that's not good or bad. All life has a beginning and an end. And that is how God has ordained it. So the current mode will end. What will come next, I would say, is up to us. We're at a point of great opportunity. Yes, things are ending because, of course, as you say, you can't grow forever on a limited planet. And we've been saying this for 50 years, but we keep on doing it. The latest research, which I'm not going to quote, anybody can look it up and look at not the theories anymore, but what's actually happening. The signs of like, oops, we're at the end of the game, the party is over, are extremely clear. And yet we continue. And I would agree with many people that we are basically a society which is behaving like an addict, whether it's a drug addict or a gambling addict or an oil addict or a GD growth addict. It's an addiction kind of process. And I've worked with addicts personally, friends and family. And my experience is well documented with others. Nothing changes until you hit the bottom, until you fall flat on your face. And I used to think people like that were weak. I've changed my mind. I've come to the opposite, that we're all like that. There's something wired into us that has that tendency. It's not a for sure, but it's so easy for us to become addicted to something. It's and it's like a glove, like, wow. And we're addicted to the current economic system, and to extract ourselves without hitting bottom, I've reached the point that I don't think that's possible. I think life will go on, but it has to, in Richard Rohr's sense, he would say the ascent is only possible. You can only ascend to heaven after descending. Christ had to die first and be dead for 3 days before he could ascend. It's just, this is how things are, which is just like an addict. You have to hit rock bottom before you can shake yourself and choose life again and go another way. And that this is
So
not
is it
a
possible?
negative thing. It's not negative. It just is. Jody.
Yeah. So the economy encourages us to descend
Into
does it not?
materialism.
Whatever, into consumption.
Yes, doesn't descend, not to descend into a realization that what we're doing is killing us. So like a
No,
drug addict,
the economy doesn't help us at all.
not with that. It does the opposite. It's like, the economy keeps on supplying us like we're a drug addict with our drug. And our drug is pleasure. Our drug is expensive vacations and cruises. Our drugs are a big house. Our drugs are status. All those things are drugs, and we love it. Who wouldn't love it? Come on.
Where do we look? Where do we look outside the economy? Where do we point as people who care, as people who don't want to be addicted, as people who see the economy for the dangerous thing that Gary Russell has the courage to point out it is?
Mm-hmm.
What do we just live the best life we can and hope for the best, or is there something we can point to bring about a conversion of life? Because we're talking about a conversion of life. We're talking about a major shift here to move from addiction, to move out of addiction. Because once you're addicted, you're always addicted, aren't you? Some of the principles of addiction.
You're always at risk of sliding back to addiction. Like
Right,
you're always there. But I have several friends and family members who have had various crises like that. And I would say, having talked with them and having had, like all of us, our own journeys, that danger makes us so conscious, aware that if we slip, we're done, that it keeps us more awake and we're not asleep at the wheel. And yeah, you're always on the edge of sliding in. And yet, when you know that, I always say the greatest danger is to think you're safe, because life is never safe. So as long as you're aware that you're in danger, you're awake, you're on the ball, you keep yourself in shape, and you're safe.
Okay,
that sounds exhausting. That sounds exhausting.
Let me push back on that. You get the addict who is addicted to alcohol, or some cocaine or some drug.
Right.
This person knows that this next beer is probably going to kill him, but he drinks it anyway, and he dies. So consumerism is the same way. We know that if we keep building bigger and bigger cars, this is eventually going to do us in.
Yep, that's right. And so some people die, but not everybody. Okay, not everybody. Some people recover, some people don't.
So some planets recover and some don't.
I can't talk about planets. I don't know about that. I can just talk about people. I'm a human being. Comment about other species is already beyond me, let alone, what's the consciousness of a dog? I have a dog in a dog run, for example. I'm taking care of this is a bit tangential, but it's the mystery of other species we don't know. So I can't possibly comment on that, let alone other planets. Jody says it's exhausting. Not really. As an example, the way I keep that awareness there is I just came back from a woodcarvers association. That's why we were delayed today. And so a bunch of generally retired men and women get together and carve wood together and have a great old time, being very quiet. And the spiritual recharge from just connecting with a piece of wood is incredible, but it's very deliberate. These people deliberately. So as an example, I was talking with a guy who I had worked with at a school 20 years ago. He was at his first meeting at this Woodcarvers Association. And it turns out about 25 years ago, when he started wood carving, it's because he had a very traumatic, stressful event, and he had to go on stress leave for several months because of there was some rough stuff happening at work. And he encountered a wood carver who trained him to do wood carving, and he's been doing it ever since. A spiritual soul activity for him, an artistic way to feel his soul, and the way he has kept himself on an even keel for 25 years is he does something artistic, but that's also physical and real 2 to 3 hours every day. And he doesn't do it as a, oh, this is hard. He does it because this makes life much, much richer. And it's healing and it works. And he's doing something real. I'm talking about that kind of path.
Now, this reminds me, just before you talk, Jody, I'll throw this in. This reminds me of section 2 of the workbook, which is talking about vocation. And the point of it is that the addictive consumerism of our society can be cured only by people finding a calling in life, because consumption is not a calling. Consumption is not what we were meant to do.
And to change it is to change. Most of us who are in the environmental groups I work in, most of us who are older feel relatively helpless because the knowledge and information and wonderful, smart, passionate people are all there. It's just a will issue. It's a political will issue, which isn't there. And helplessness can be that because of the knowledge you have, the helplessness can be very soul destroying. And to emphasize again, the spirit path we have with St. Francis is one way, and certainly has been my way, to not fall into giving up, despair, or delusion, thinking all will be well, to avoid those traps because you've got this inner strength from somewhere else. And so when we face the topic of chapter 8, which is the desecration of Mother Earth, so there's not a lot of grace or spirit in that, can be really, like you're a drug addict and you go, oh my gosh, if I take my next hit, I'm going to die. Do I take it or not? It's a little heavy. And yet my experience has been, if you have this spirit within you, that you're not alone, that you have, I've had a real struggle, like most of us, with the idea of the poverty of the spirit, in the Beatitudes. I'm like, and yet I've had to remind myself that many times, poverty of the spirit, because we are the poor monks, we are the poor Franciscans, right? So poverty is a concept wired into our path. But what that is, which you guys know, but I always have to remind myself, it's that I don't just rely on myself. I'm poor in that I know I am not alone, that I have God within me, and I need, it's a necessity. And therefore I'm poor because I admit to my need for God and others and the world around me. So therefore I'm poor. I need that. It's not like I did it my way and I'm a great American cowboy hero. We're absolutely not that. So our path as a Franciscan, with that concept of poverty wired into our path, is certainly a constructive avenue to have a way forward. Because you asked before, what do we do? You live a simpler life. But it's not just physical, it's also in our non-judgmental relationships with others. God judges, not me. So if I have a lovely neighbor who just went on a cruise, and I just think, oh, thank goodness I didn't have to go on the cruise, because I would hate it. And everything about cruises drives me crazy. And yet she's a lovely person, and I can't possibly think ill of her. I just can't do that. So and people will notice that if we don't judge, if we aren't condescending, if we're all not know-it-alls, we're just in this journey together. We do the best we can. We have our charism, and it will shine forth. Just like Francis, he just, when people throw stuff at him, he didn't react. He didn't spaz out. He didn't spit them back and call them names. He just took it like, okay, that's fine. I'm going to go forward and do what I do. And when you don't react, and I admit I find that really hard when I experience stupid or violent, or I want to react. I just want to say something or punch them or something. And well, I've learned the hard way that doesn't work, doesn't go so well. And I haven't reached the point where inside of me I don't want to react. I still want to react. Now, I like you guys are both grown-ups. I'm assuming so anyway, and so you don't react. But I actually think that people notice that in a very unconscious way. But if we could be more like Francis, who really didn't react, like inside of himself, it was equanimity. It was like, you are from God. You are this lady who's throwing dirt at me and thinking I'm a complete Looney Tune is this wonderful lady who God loves. People can tell. People know that whatever that visceral thing is, they get it. And we have the gift of a model to follow. What an amazing gift. And it works. It has this really weird power.
Gordon alluded to the fact that he's connected with a political party.
Yeah.
So if this political party was
Yeah.
to form a government in Canada, what's one piece of legislation you would like to see that would address some issue in our economy regarding care for creation?
I'm going to take a page out of Gary's book because what he states is, I'd say, the prerequisite for anything. Like you have a solution, but you have to have something that is set up before. And that's before is we have to stop growing. We're at the point, there's 8+ billion of us right now. Our consumption of everything is, the earth is going to be denuded and destroyed. So we just have to stop growing. Basically what degrowth. We have to figure out an economy that can work without growing. And without that, everything else we try to do with plastics and greenhouse gases and everything else, the long list, soil erosion, whatever it is you want to pick on, is a moot point. We have to figure out how to live with less. And that means less people and less stuff. The less people is the hard stuff. That's become politically incorrect. It didn't used to be. When the conversations about this started in the 70s and 80s, it was always two aspects. It was consumption, population. And we don't talk about population anymore. That's the pink elephant in the room now. But give me a break, right? Unless we do that, we're done. And it is happening. Younger people have a birth rate of 1.33, replacements 2.1. So we say, oh, our population keeps going up in Canada. It's keeping on increasing in the US as well. I'm assuming we have a lot of Americans in our audience. And it looks, wow, we're growing. If you looked at our native birth rate, we're shrinking, especially in Canada, almost at the level of South Korea, because it ain't working. And so people react to an environment where things are becoming stressful, difficult by reducing the number of kids, which is neither, I'm not going to say it's good or bad in general, but certainly at this juncture in history, it is a positive thing, not a negative thing. It's having one car, whereas I know we're scared of it. Oh my gosh, the population's going down. Hip hooray. It would be great that we go from 2 cars to 1 car. Just like seeing 2 cars to 1 car is not negative. Going from growing population to decreasing is not negative, because it's about more the quality of life rather than the quantity of life, to make sure everybody is included. In our current system of economic system ain't working. So for example, today in the news, I like to be topical, driving to this meeting. What's been happening for the past year or so in Canada is particularly odd. We have an economy that's growing, but the dollars per person shrinking. And that's very odd. That's never happened before. So once again, today in particular, we had doubled the job growth that the economists expected. And we go, yay, more jobs. But the unemployment rate went up because we had so many people come in that there's actually more unemployment. We're at this point, clearly, in Canada at least, I can't speak for the world, that growth has become self-defeating, and rather than being positive, it's become pretty obviously negative. And that's what growth does. You eventually hit a wall. I would posit that looking back, people will look back at around now and say, that's when we hit the wall. And it's not just physical, it's social, it's psychological, it's cultural. There's all kinds of dimensions to when you hit the wall. Stress, anxiety, the opioid epidemic as a reflection of people not being able to cope and manage anymore. The homeless encampments all over the place in a rich country. People are just, the growth is being counterproductive. So we have to degrowth. Once again, in my environmental circles, it's a done deal. It's going to happen anyway. We either choose to do it or Mother Nature is going to do it for us. And Mother Nature is a very harsh mistress. We always say, oh, Mother Earth is beautiful and wonderful and everything. And yes, but don't mess with her because she's got a really harsh side to her. And if you mess with her, you're going to see the other side of Mother Earth.
Yeah,
The
don't get her
angry
pissed off.
mother. It's like the angry mother bear. We do not mess with the angry mother bear. And I and others would posit we are messing with an angry mother bear. So we get to choose. Key thing is God has given us the gift of free choice. There's nothing ordained here, nothing written. We, in particular, right now, we have the gift of choice. We get to choose every day, every action, every conversation. But because we're Franciscans, we have to do it not, as Jody said, being not from a position of negativity of what's wrong, but choosing what is right. It has to be with joy. Otherwise, what's the point? Nobody wants to be with a party pooper. You want to be with Francis. You want to be with the party guy, but party in the right way. Just instead of that way, we're going to go that way. It's like in a metaphor, we're going from being the young Francis to the old Francis. We still love music. We still love good people. We still love company. We still enjoy each other's. We still sing songs. We just, instead of that way, we're going that way. And that's where we're at. We're at that point of choice.
Okay, let me be the annoying economist and throw a monkey wrench into this. And that I fully agree with you that we need degrowth, that the environment cannot withstand obsessive perpetual growth. But capitalism cannot withstand a decline in growth because investment opportunities disappear. And so they're not building as many factories anymore because growth is disappearing and people will start losing jobs. So isn't degrowth counterproductive?
It depends if you think about quantity instead of quality. So what we're talking about in degrowth is a shift from quantity to quality. So not more cars, better cars, not more houses, better houses, not more of everything, but better of everything. It's like growing up, okay? When you're a kid and you're a teenager, you are physically growing. There's more of you and you need a lot of resources. And if you remember being 15 or 16, I remember, I would eat like crazy. Oh my gosh, I could eat and eat. The stomach was never empty. That's like us. But eventually you have to grow up and you mature and you qualitatively are growing. We're still growing, but we're growing in a sense of we're now going to become a grown-up rather than a child or a teenager. So we're just still children growing more rather than, oh, I'm now 21 and oh, I'm not becoming taller or, well, hopefully not going sideways yet at 21. I'm becoming mature and I'm realizing things like the implications and repercussions of my decisions and my choice, which, by the way, a teenage brain can't do. You just can't even do it, right? If I do this choice 2 years from now, it's going to bite me. They can't do it. The brain actually can't do it. We're like that teenager, which is the way we are. So it's a matter of just growing up and becoming grown-ups. That's all. We're trying to maintain children. So degrowth is about shifting from more to better. And there'll still be jobs, different kinds of jobs. Don't forget, in the monkey wrench of all this, we got the AI going on here. So the jobs looks like right now, they're all going to be annihilated anyway. Even if we grow more, AI is going to do it all. There's big Amazon warehouse down the road. I was once again talking with a neighbor yesterday who's a wood carver. isn't that great? We've got this huge Amazon warehouse. I said, it's 95% automated. They hit a button and the robot goes back and forth. The guys who move the boxes get paid minimum wage, which you can't possibly live on. And then there's the odd guy who repairs the robots who actually makes a decent living. That's not a job. And that's, by the way, why in Canada we bring people in to do those McJobs. Because other people say, I'm not doing that because I can't pay the rent and buy food on that kind of a salary. The current system has relied upon basically some form of slavery, some form of somebody at the bottom who we can give just enough crumbs that they survive, but that's about it. And I used to always, Canadians, by the way, if we have some Americans in the audience, I will admit to something which is unfortunate, that Canadians used to point down south of the border and say, look how naughty those people are. We don't do stuff like that. We didn't have the slavery in the same way. We did have a little bit, but not in the same way. We didn't have a civil war. We don't have slums. Now we do. All of the American problems are now here. We are not superior, but we used to be pretty smug about it. Don't you think, Jody, in the past we were a little bit smug about that kind of thing? No?
I'm a Newfoundlander. We weren't smug.
Oh, okay. Yeah. By the way, American friends, Newfoundland used to be its own country until 1949. Okay.
49,
Probably
that's
don't
right.
know that. So it's got its own story. Absolutely. Absolutely. But yeah.
Well,
So,
There we
Gordon,
go. Shoot.
do you think that do you think there's a consciousness among certain generations who see the picture differently? Or can we talk about the population generally? Or in talking about the population
Uh,
generally, and we're talking about how things are we really talking about those who are over 50 with permanent jobs, who have the pension plans, who are actually the ones that are fixed in the mindset to consume more? Is there a difference among generations?
I've tried to talk with as many people as possible to get a sense of that. I've worked hard to talk with I have two son-in-laws, non-family members, who I try to talk about things. My experience has been that to talk about this kind of issue, which is just beyond just getting through the day, the younger you are, the less bandwidth they have to do it. They're more aware that there's the state of Denmark is rotten, to quote Hamlet, right? There's something that's not right. But it's so hard just to pay the bills and get through the day, and the isolation that they experience, isolation is always because of COVID and just technology. They're much less social than we were at an equivalent age because of the culture. That has brought in a certain fear as a sort of a normal state of being. The isolation creates that fear where they don't have the extra bandwidth even to investigate and explore and aren't interested. And my experience has been they just feel like there's nothing they can do anyway. And so the older people, even though they do consume more and are bigger, all that stuff is true. And some of them even feel guilty about it, including myself. They have the bandwidth and the resources to entertain and discuss this stuff and try to do something. In other words, the revolutionary spirit of the 60s of we're going to stop the Vietnam War equivalent, it ain't there. It just isn't there. The 60s generation had the luxury of there were lots of jobs. Everything was getting better all the time. And if you were a bum for 10 years, you could eventually fall on your feet and all would be well. And getting a house and a car was cheap. My university rent was $50 a month, and now it's 900, right? And so at the end of the day, in terms of actual action, I don't see any generational difference at all. There's a few people of every age who are doing things. And if anything, I sense, once again, I'm not going to say this is true, but this has been my experience, that there's more of a feeling of helplessness among the young people because they do have a better sense of the reality of what's going on emotionally, but they have more of a sense that there's nothing they can do about it, which is a young person. That stinks. I remember thinking I could do something. And
Do you
there's less
think
of that now. I'm not going to say no, because that's not true, but It's less than it was because life just to get through the day is so much harder. It's much more of a rat race. So we're all rats and they got to work harder to be a rat just to get by than we did.
Do you think the cases in the Supreme Court, those that are presently being discussed, those that have been settled, and the upcoming continuous negotiations with Indigenous people may
Yeah.
affect the Canadian consciousness with regards to economy and respect for land and creation?
Consciousness is a big word. As an example, my first election was in 2007, right after Al Gore's movie Inconvenient Truth. And there's been more and more consciousness and awareness of what's going on. But my personal percentage of the vote has actually gone down every election. So consciousness doesn't necessarily translate into anything happening. So I think there is more consciousness and there is more awareness. Are there still reservations, for example, with undrinkable water? Yes. Has the mercury poisoning in grassy narrows been admitted to and dealt with? No. So more consciousness, more window dressing. I would agree with Gary until the basic economic system, which must have growth, must have more, until that changes, all these other things, which are happening, which are good things, but they're basically allowing the current system to survive longer, when I would be of the ilk that the sooner it dies, the better, so that something new can be born. And this is a good thing. So we need to stop being an addict before more destruction happens. And more destruction as in 60% of the songbirds in Canada are now dead. Okay, there's no insects for them to eat because the insect population has gone down by 60%. Therefore, there's 60% songbirds. When I came to where I am living in the country here 20 years ago, I was like, oh my gosh, I'll never be able to sleep in the spring. It's too loud. I don't, I barely hear a tweet. It's not zero, but it's a tiny fraction. And it's not just me anecdotally saying that. The stats are there. And it's not just in Europe where they've killed everything long ago. There's hardly anything wild. I mean, I go to Europe and I never get bitten by a mosquito. What's with that, right? But you know, the life out there is noticeably different. These are all the other beings of creation, which are part of God's care. I mean, remember, we were made on the last day. We weren't made first because we're the most important. I sometimes wonder, as a reflection, I said, would the most important thing be made first or last? I usually do in my life the stuff that's the most important first. And we got made last, and that makes me question things. Everything else, we're just part of something. We're just part of the story. We aren't the story. We're just a thread in the story.
So how do we take first steps in calling for conversion of life? You're calling for a major piece in, because we all live in the economy and we
Yep,
need it to survive in
yep,
Canada.
absolutely,
We need to survive everywhere, particularly in Canada, which is a northern, unfriendly climate, like physical climate.
absolutely.
We all know what cold is. We know what
Yep,
snow is. So,
yep.
what's a constructive first step in dealing with an economy that's leading us towards destruction?
The first step for everybody. This is by the way, this is an answer my son-in-law, who's young, hates. He wants a black and white answer, and you're inferring that there is a black and white answer. And I know you don't, you're just trying to trick me, Jody. I know that because you like to trick me. It really depends upon where you are in your life, right? Yeah, you're the trickster, right? Don't you love the trickster gods?
So, generally, people, you're a storyteller. And you know
Yeah,
what? I consider myself a storyteller, partly because I'm a parish priest and I
yeah,
tell
yeah,
stories.
absolutely.
But the storytellers are the biggest liars in society because we embellish to make the point. We want to draw people in, so we tell the story.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
not asking you that. I'm just saying that given the conversion of life that's needed, is there a simple first step that might happen that we should, a goal would be the first step. So what's the most important? What's the most important for, you talk about creation and how we're at the end. What's the most important first step we can invite people to take?
You have to figure out what you want versus what you need and do what
Good
you
point.
need,
Yeah.
but also with joy. It can't be done as I'm doing this great sacrifice because I'm such a great guy or lady or whatever. Look at me, woe is me. No, unless it's done that this is what I need, and it feeds my soul. If it feeds your soul to start a garden, great, but it has to be more quality and less quantity, whatever it is.
Okay, this leads me to where I wanted to take it. In that, like, we're Franciscans, we have a rule of life, and one part of our rule of life is to simplify our lives, live more simply.
Yep.
Which means live with less. The other part of the rule of life is self-denial, and this is where it gets into the joy you're talking about. As a matter of fact, when I was reporting to my formation counselor when I was a novice, and we got onto the question of self-denial, at one point she asked me, "Are you finding a joy in that?" And I'd never thought about that before. And then when I thought about it more, simplification and self-denial is removing all the excess baggage that gets in the way of me walking with God. And then I can find the joy in it. Now, how are we going to get ordinary people there?
Richard Rohr, who all of us know, and I'm assuming most of our audience knows, is a Franciscan monk in New Mexico. He talks a lot about us all being prophets. He had a whole year about how we as Franciscans are prophets. And I would say one of our hats that all of us wear as Franciscans, we are prophets crying in the wilderness. We have a vision, and we have a vision. And of course, prophets arise when there's some sort of need to go in a different direction. We've been going a certain direction, and then the society reaches basically a dead end. And this is quite normal, and there's nothing terrible about it. You do something and it works for a while, and then oops, I've changed, the world has changed, I need to go in a different direction. And that's always difficult. It's always a crisis. And the prophet is there to call us to go in a different direction. And that's all of our jobs. We need to be prophets. We're prophets. We're John the Baptist crying in the wilderness, every single one of us. And if we're not seen as slightly weird, maybe we're like, maybe we're a Looney Tune. Are you like, I read a quote somewhere, I can't remember where it comes from. We walk the line between ecstasy and insanity. And it's a dangerous line, but that's the line that the prophets walk. And if we're to be a prophet, and then you go into the danger zone, but it's not dangerous or nasty like Jody inferred. It's actually a joyful place. It's like the sunrise and the sunset, which is, it's right on the edge of the day and the night. Those are the most beautiful parts of the day. We live in the sunrise, we live in the sunset, we live in that in-between, that knife edge of the greatest potential. And it's a wonderful place to be. It's great.
That's a beautiful way to bring this to a close, because we want to be conscious of time.
Yeah. We didn't say at all I wrote 10 pages of scribble here.
So
guys.
we need another podcast. I told you this yesterday.
I
said this already. I said this yesterday when we met, that we need more than one podcast, because that's okay.
Yeah.
But I just think this is the words you just had was a good place for us to bring this part to a close.
Yeah, absolutely.
And living between the sunrise and the sunset and that waterland of possibilities is a good place to bring this to a close. Yeah, unless Gary has an objection. I don't know.
No objection. I'm just thinking, you as the parish priest amongst us, maybe you can close us with a prayer.
Let us pray. By the way, Gordon, thank you very much for this. And I know we're just getting going here, but it's beautiful. Thank you. Creator, pour out your Spirit upon us and grant us a new vision of your glory, a new experience of your power, a new faithfulness to your word, and a new consecration in your service, so that as your kingdom unfolds, we may continue to serve in a Franciscan spirituality through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen. Great. So we all thank each other for this. And for the audience, we'll be back in a week or so with another one with somebody else probably, and then have Gordon back sometime to continue this conversation.
Gordon, I've enjoyed this. Thank you.
It's a good warm up. I got a sense we're finally warming up, right? I love, there's a podcast where they talk about philosophy, and there's two guys and a woman who are joking around and bantering the entire time and makes it most entertaining. I really enjoyed the little bit of a giggle with you guys. Well done.
Yeah, both of you guys are more entertaining than me. I'm more the academic.
You were awesome, Gary.
Okay, bye bye to you guys and bye bye everybody. See you again soon.
Bye bye.
Bye.